Okay.
Hello, Rita. Thank you so much for joining the ScaleUp Africa Wealth and Impact podcast.
And thank you, Emma, for inviting me.
So the first question we always kick off with is how you got into philanthropy and how you got to this wonderful position with your journal. So tell us a bit more about your personal experience and journey and how you got to this position.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. It was probably a bit of serendipity involved. So I started out actually as a research assistant for a university, and actually as a research assistant in a marketing related research center. And again, I never really intended to go into academia, but I found that working at big corporations, for example, I worked at the House of Fraser and Adidas in Germany at the headquarters. And I kind of very quickly realized that the for-profit world really wasn't for me. I just didn't feel passionate enough working in that sphere. And then when I joined academia, I thought, oh, this is really, really great because, I've got autonomy. I can work on very many different projects. Really suited my kind of lifestyle. But then also I found that some of the projects that I had to work on in the marketing center were not really driving me. And every time I started a project which was linked to the third sector, philanthropy, charity, marketing related, I just kind of found more of that passion. I found that kind of drove me. There was more passion. There was kind of something purposeful, meaningful to be kind of doing research which benefited the non-profit sector. And, so I did all sorts of kind of different pieces of research to do with things like, I don't know, how to motivate young people to give, because, that being at the time, articles appearing that young, wealthy individuals don't particularly like to give to charities. So why is that?
Yes.
So I kind of tried to find answers, to those questions.
And what did you find? What did you find there? That's an interesting
It was
question.
very interesting. What I found was that these younger individuals didn't really think about giving. They kind of had this attitude that charity begins at home. But then if it came to a push, in terms of what type of causes they would support if they had to, it kind of turned out to be more of the hedonistic, if you like, kind of ways of giving. So kind of, for example, a scenario giving to an art gallery in return for being invited to a nice evening soiree or something like that.
Right.
So so I kind of I remember doing a conjoint analysis and finding that okay, not too surprising maybe, but just some really interesting things. And don't forget, this was about 20 years ago, so quite a long time ago, and things would have changed.
Sure.
And yeah, so kind of looking into many different things, looking into why people give to food banks, or doing kind of different studies in relation to disability. Even did a few studies on driverless cars and what kind of disabled people would think about in terms of being able to, become more independent because they're being driven around in a driverless car, and how that would kind of have an impact on the freedom, the mobility. Yeah. So I've kind of dabbled into very many different things. And then later on, it was out of the blue. So Wiley, the publishers, wrote to me saying that both of the previous editors-in-chief had recommended me to take over the journal. So it was an eminent professor called Professor Adrian Sargent, who used to be based at Indiana University in the US, and Jane Hudson, who I believe now is at Exeter University. She's a professor there, I think. And they both recommended me to take over the journal. And, I was kind of a little bit shocked and pleasantly surprised that they recommended my name. And I didn't think twice about it. I thought, this is definitely something.
For you.
It's a yes for me.
Yes.
And I definitely want to go ahead. So, and I've been doing it now for 6 years. I've just signed with Wiley the third term for another 3 years. So I'm kind of excited to take it forward, and especially because this is kind of quite an interesting journal in this space. I mean, philanthropy is relatively niche in the academic circles. There's some kind of big flagship journals, but I think the good thing about Journal of Philanthropy is that it caters to the non-profit and the for-profit world of philanthropy. And as you know, the for-profit world of philanthropy is expanding quite rapidly.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be, it would be myopic to kind of not to kind of let that space, the corporate social responsibility space, have kind of more of an avenue to kind of look to understand how.
So yes, yeah. So the journal. I mean, 6 years going on 7 years. How have you taken the journal forward? I mean, I love the fact that you're blending research with practitioners' requirements and also the nonprofit with the corporate philanthropy, CSR. How have you seen the last 6, 7 years changing, and what trends are you seeing emerging in terms of how the different stakeholders are approaching philanthropy? Because this series is very much about unearthing the thought leadership, the thinking, the trends on a global level, and how philanthropy as a field, which is, like you said, very niche, changing. How is that changing?
Yes, so just quickly from the academic perspective, it's been kind of challenging for me because, as I mentioned to you before, I'm trying to really kind of integrate this kind of academic and practitioner insight into the journal, which in many academic circles, is not the done thing, kind of maybe kind of getting practice involved is sometimes people shy away from that. So I've had to kind of really think strategically about how that's going to work. But actually, a couple of the accreditation bodies in business now are actually actively calling that people should be, linking up and working in partnership with practice, when they're doing academic work as well. So impact in the academic world is becoming more and more important. So luckily for me, that's helped me shape the journal in relation to getting new types of format out in the journal. For example, I think I mentioned to you before, we have a dialogue series where practitioners, policymakers, and academics come together in a dialogic form where one person writes maybe a thought-provoking or a provocative article about something trending in philanthropy, could be corporate or otherwise. And then people from the industry, from policy, can come in and comment and write kind of a response piece to the central pillar article. And finally, the author of the central pillar article then comes back and reflects on all the different perspectives that have come in through this dialogic experience. And I believe that it's a really strong format because people writing in these special issues are able to kind of, reflect and form and shape their understanding of different philanthropic perspectives and learn from the experience of just kind of writing in the journal, and hopefully other people. We do spend a lot of time disseminating, normally via LinkedIn, to practitioners, the key pieces of practical advice that we think are important for them to understand, and they don't need to be worried too much about going past the paywall to access the academic articles, which can be quite expensive. But yes, we the readership and the people writing for the journal are specifically mostly interested in donor behavior, the psychology of why people give. There's a lot of interest at the moment on crowdfunding and also grants and foundations. So I can see that, from the submissions, these would be the key three topics and themes that are an interest from both the authorship and also the readership side.
And we spoke a bit earlier about how young entrepreneurs have also emerged. I mean, everyone's talking about the great wealth transfer. Everyone's talking about the third wave of AI with, tech coming into the forum, creating more millionaires and really sort of rich people. Again, what have you seen as the change? I mean, you talked about the fact that young people, and we've certainly seen this, a lot of the next generation or currently new wealth holders and stewards are very interested in the experiences. So one of the things that ScaleUp Africa is doing is also creating space and time, and a really curated experience where folks can come to Africa maybe for the first time, if say they are interested in diversifying their portfolios of philanthropy in the Africa region, for example, and we take them through a process where we allow them the space and time to get the advice, frame, realign their values, and really sort of discover some of the options available for their giving in a way that is allowing them to experience some cultures and tourism, something different, and being removed from their day-to-day maybe lives to really look at how they can diversify and have more of a global footprint if they're that way inclined. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about what you're seeing around the next generation conversations that you're seeing through the journal and your work.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because I'm involved in a really major piece of work on charity disintermediation, which touches actually on a lot of the points that you mentioned, kind of maybe looking at it from a slightly different perspective. But we are looking, and I'm working with a think tank called Rogare. So it's a big network of practitioners in fundraising mostly, and myself on the academic side. And we're looking to understand how philanthropy and charity in general is changing, because what we're seeing and what we refer to by disintermediation is looking to see how the traditional charity model is being bypassed. So if you think of your kind of usual Oxfam and SPCC, where there's a function for fundraising, so professional fundraisers going out, fundraising for the cause, which might be to do with children or poverty or the elderly, and then within that same organization using that fundraised money to help the beneficiaries. And what we're seeing is that through a variety of different mechanisms, the traditional charity is being bypassed. So, for example, the key one that people refer to is crowdfunding.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, I could, you might be fundraising, maybe one of your family members is severely ill and needs medical treatment, and maybe there's no provision for that treatment to where you are. So you start a crowdfund campaign, and I will respond by donating my money to you. And what we're seeing is that not just young people, but actually young people definitely are in this camp, that they prefer to give to these causes which seem a bit more immediate, more impactful, more personable, more emotional. And so I might think that, I've transferred the money, now you can go and solve the problem of the medical issue. And, I've done my bit, I've got a warm glow, I've helped a friend, an acquaintance, or somebody that is in need. And I'd rather do this type of more immediate charity work than going to the NSPCC website and clicking a button and giving £100. So we are seeing that young people, whether they're wealthy or not, prefer to engage in these immediate, more personable stories and charity activities. But we're not just looking at the fundraising side, we're also looking at how beneficiaries are actually being helped. So, for example, there's a lot of corporations, as you know, getting involved, social enterprises, corporate social responsibility programs, getting involved at the other end, where they set about, and they might have a pot of money, or they might also fundraise, but set about kind of helping to alleviate, maybe through a foundation, some kind of social ills, poverty, what have you, climate change related. And they're kind of getting in on that space, that the charity sector would have normally been involved in. And, that's all well and good. We're not kind of critiquing or criticizing, kind of more and more people getting into that space. Most likely it's a good thing that people are getting involved in new sorts of philanthropy, whether it's crowdfunding or through foundations to help with a specific cause. But what we kind of do worry about is the ethics, the regulation, the accountability, the safeguarding that is lacking in some of these new forms, new platforms, new ways of giving, new ways of fundraising. Because if you think about it, the charity sector has been at it for a long time, and there's a lot of regulation around how they operate in fundraising, in terms of how they treat the beneficiaries, safeguarding. Whereas a lot of these for-profit providers, crowdfunding platforms, corporations coming into the space, that sort of same sort of safeguarding accountability is not in place, or at least not in place yet. And there's ethical questions, because the charity sector, as I mentioned to you before, I came into trying to help the charity sector because I feel like it's under-resourced and it can do with some help. Whereas when the for-profit motive comes in, which ultimately it will come in, even if it's corporate social responsibility related, or it's donor advised funds or platforms like Kiva, which do micro lending and have a different philosophy to philanthropy and how charity should work. Then the for-profit motive has to be looked at with a little bit of I don't know if it's skepticism, but you have to have a good oversight on why are people doing things, how are they doing it, and is there a profit motive? Because that will ultimately change the mission, the objectives, and the positions.
Yeah, and how are you seeing? I mean, normally you'd think that, a corporation giving, and yes, we all know about CSR, but you think that corporations actually giving doesn't actually fit together. So how much of that are we actually seeing? Is it quite a pervasive new trend, or?
I think there's a lot of new foundations popping up. I mean, as you know, things in the world have changed quite dramatically. So there is less and less funding for, for a lot of public sector services, and ultimately we know that the charity pound is falling, and year on year, not just in Europe but in North America and elsewhere. So one of the reasons for that is that obviously some of the money is being shifted to, for example, crowdfunding activities, which are, for example, for schools or hospitals, which in the past may have been better served by governments.
Right.
But because the funding is kind of not reaching a lot of the local authorities or the public sector services that we've been accustomed to, parents and people, as you mentioned, locally in a kind of local setting, want to support their local schools, want to support their local hospitals. So that charitable money is going to the local school, to their own children, and to the local hospitals to serve their own interests, in terms of healthcare, right? And we are also seeing that a lot of the money for international aid is being chopped back. Why? We know from the academic research that people find international kind of causes quite abstract, and they prefer to give to people that they perceive to be local, that they can identify and see as something tangible and something which is proximal. So those at the moment, even if you look at the crowdfunding research, those are the causes that seem to resonate with donors, whether young, maybe, or even older. And that seems to be a trend across the board.
And tell me what's next for the journal. I mean, what's your next take on philanthropy, and where do you see that moving? I know you talked about looking at other regions like South America, Africa, in terms of readership and your stakeholder base. So what's next for you?
So I'm hoping that I've kind of in the pipeline got some very promising, very credible networks that I may be able to work with in Europe. So that's the European Network on Philanthropy, which is based at St. Andrews and also in Amsterdam. So the key people kind of running that network are based in those regions. I've got good networks in the States, especially in Indiana University.
The Lilly School of Philanthropy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're kind of, that's one of the most prominent
philanthropy
places
schools in the world. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm hoping that there will be a pipeline of practice papers coming from doctoral students from that institute, but also from elsewhere. And then recently, actually, I'm very excited that we've set up a partnership with the ISTR, which is the International Society for Third Sector Research, which I think they're based in Seattle, but they have conferences biannually in Europe, and they have roundtable discussions, and their roundtable discussions we are seeking to turn into dialogue papers. So the kind of latest trends and topics being discussed at these conferences, being written up as a central pillar piece with the people in the room who contributed to that roundtable, sharing their insights and feedback on that particular topic, and then looking to kind of very quickly get that published in the journal in a digital format, so it's kind of readily, quickly available to people in practice and in academia.
Fantastic, Rita. Thank you so much. And your final word on how we can support the journal and get in touch with you?
Well, I would love to, as I think I mentioned earlier, we are really hoping that in the next 3 years, with my renewed role as editor-in-chief, I'd really like to kind of set up more networks and partnerships in Africa and Latin America, so we can hear more of the voices from academics and practitioners in the field who are based in these regions. I've had trouble kind of finding those networks, and I'm hoping that perhaps you can help us.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll talk more about that, and folks watching can also get in touch. So thank you so much, Rita. I really appreciate your time and having you here, and looking forward to partnering with you as
Yes.
well. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Take care.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.